Whispers in the Woods. Camping Horror Story. Intro. They thought it was just another camping trip, a weekend of laughter, ghost stories, and stargazing. But deep in the heart of Black Hollow Forest, something was waiting. Watching. Whispering their names in the dark. By the time they realized they weren't alone, it was already too late. The arrival. The car rumbled over the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust that clung to the humid summer air. Liam gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he maneuvered the vehicle through the dense woodland path leading to Black Hollow Forest. The trees stretched high above, their skeletal branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the late afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the forest floor. In the passenger seat, Sarah hummed along to the music playing from the radio, her fingers tapping against her thigh in rhythm. Jake and Emily sat in the back, passing a bag of chips between them, excitement flickering in their eyes. They had been planning this camping trip for weeks, an escape from the monotony of their city lives, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. "Man, this place is really out in the middle of nowhere," Jake muttered, peering out the window at the towering trees. "That's the whole point," Liam replied, his voice laced with amusement. "No distractions, no responsibilities. Just us, the campfire, and the stars." Emily smiled, leaning her head against the window. "I can already feel my stress melting away." Sarah checked her phone. "No service," she announced, shaking her head. "Guess we're officially off the grid." "Good," Liam said. "The whole point of camping is to unplug and live in the moment." Sarah rolled her eyes playfully, but couldn't deny the appeal of disconnecting for a while. The city had been overwhelming lately, the constant buzz of notifications, deadlines, and responsibilities. A weekend in the wilderness was exactly what they needed. As they drove deeper into the forest, the road narrowed, the trees pressing in on either side. The official campsite was still a few miles ahead, but Liam had other plans. He had heard about a hidden spot off the main trail, a secluded area untouched by the usual campers. He had read about it in an old hiking forum, a place known only to those willing to venture beyond the marked paths. "We're almost there," he said, eyes scanning the dense foliage for the unmarked trail entrance. Sarah frowned. "Wait, I thought we were camping at the official site." Liam grinned. "Where's the fun in that? I found something better. A secret spot, completely isolated. No other campers, no noise. Just us and nature." Emily and Jake exchanged glances. "Sounds cool," Jake said, always up for an adventure. Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure it's safe?" Liam waved off her concern. "People camp out here all the time. Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" The moment the words left his mouth, a sudden gust of wind howled through the trees, rattling the branches like skeletal fingers against a coffin lid. A shiver ran down Emily's spine, but she forced a laugh. Famous last words, Liam. Liam smirked and pulled the car over. "Come on, guys. Trust me." 2. The unmarked trail. The entrance to the unmarked trail was nearly invisible, concealed by overgrown bushes and a fallen tree branch. It looked untouched, as if nature itself had been trying to hide it. "This is it," Liam said, grabbing his backpack from the trunk. Sarah sighed. "Great. We're about to become one of those missing hiker stories." "Relax," Liam said. "It's just a short hike." The group gathered their gear and stepped onto the trail. The deeper they walked, the quieter the forest became. The usual sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. Even the wind seemed to die, leaving only the sound of their footsteps crunching over twigs and dried leaves. "This place is weirdly quiet," Emily murmured. "Peaceful," Liam corrected. But there was something unnatural about the silence. The kind that made the hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stand on end. After nearly an hour of hiking, they reached a clearing, a perfect spot for camping. The trees encircled the area like silent sentinels, and a small stream ran nearby, its water glistening in the fading sunlight. "This is amazing," Jake said, dropping his backpack. They set up camp quickly, pitching their tents, gathering firewood, and preparing for the night. As darkness settled, they lit a fire, its flames casting flickering shadows across the trees. "This is perfect," Liam said, leaning back against a log. "Told you guys it was worth it." They laughed, shared stories, and roasted marshmallows. It felt like any other camping trip, until the whispers started. 3. The first whispers. It began subtly. A faint murmur carried on the wind, so quiet that it could have easily been dismissed as imagination. But then it grew. Emily was the first to notice. She was staring into the fire when she heard it, a soft, distant whisper. Her head snapped up, eyes scanning the darkness. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" Liam replied. Emily hesitated. A voice. Whispering. Jake chuckled. "Nice try, Em. Not falling for your ghost story setup." "I'm serious," she insisted. "It was really faint, but I heard something." Sarah frowned. "I thought I heard something too." The group fell silent, listening. The forest held its breath. And then, a whisper. Soft. Almost affectionate. Calling their names. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Liam, that wasn't the wind." Liam's expression hardened. "Probably just an echo or something. This place is dense. It could be sound bouncing off the trees." Emily wasn't convinced. She turned on her phone's voice recorder. "Let's see if it picks up anything." They sat in uneasy silence, waiting. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. Then the whisper returned. But this time it was clearer. "You shouldn't be here." The word sent a chill through the group. Jake forced a laugh. "Okay, that was creepy. Good job, whoever did that." No one answered. Emily checked her phone and played back the recording. At first, there was only static, then a distorted voice, barely human, echoing the words. "You shouldn't be here." The firelight flickered, and the shadows around them seemed to stretch, moving unnaturally. Sarah stood abruptly. "I don't like this. Maybe we should go back." Liam shook his head. "It's just a weird sound. We're not leaving over some creepy noises." A branch snapped in the woods. Emily gasped. That was close. They turned toward the darkness, their firelight barely illuminating the edge of the clearing. The trees stood still, but something was out there. Watching. Then the whisper came again. Closer. More insistent. "You shouldn't be here." The night suddenly felt a lot colder. And they realized they weren't alone. The unseen watcher. The air had grown colder. The fire crackled weakly, its glow barely holding back the creeping darkness. Silence hung between them, thick and heavy. That whisper, "You shouldn't be here," still echoed in their ears. Sarah hugged herself, shivering. "I don't like this place." Jake forced a laugh. "Come on, guys. It's just our imagination. Sounds always get weird at night." But Emily wasn't convinced. She replayed the recording on her phone. The whisper was still there, chilling as before. But this time there was something else. Faint. Soft. The sound of footsteps, crunching through dry leaves. "What is that?" Liam frowned, leaning in closer. "Someone walking," Emily whispered. Her voice trembled. "It could be an animal," Jake said, but his tone lacked confidence. Sarah's eyes darted to the trees. "Then why did it say our names?" Liam took a deep breath, switching on his flashlight. "Look, if someone else is out here messing with us, we need to know." He stepped away from the fire, moving cautiously toward the trees. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but twisted branches and fallen leaves. Silence. Then, a sudden rush of movement behind them. The sound of running footsteps, fast, frantic, crashing through the underbrush. "Who's there?" Liam shouted, whipping around. Nothing. Just the stillness of the woods. The vanishing footsteps. "Maybe it's a prank?" Jake offered, though his voice wavered. "There's no one else here," Emily whispered, gripping her phone tightly. Sarah stepped closer to the edge of their campsite and gasped. "Look!" Faint footprints led toward the trees. Fresh. As if someone had just been standing there, watching them. Then, right before their eyes, the footprints started to fade. One by one, as if the earth was swallowing them whole. Liam's stomach clenched. "What the hell?" Jake reached out hesitantly, his boots scuffing the dirt where the prints had been. He shuddered. It's like they were never there. A cold wind rustled through the trees, whispering between the branches. And then, a voice. Low. Hollow. Right behind them. "Run." The fire flickered violently. The shadows stretched unnaturally, moving like they had a life of their own. Emily let out a choked breath. "We need to leave. Now." Liam grabbed his backpack. Agreed. But when they turned to find the trail, it was gone. The path they had taken just hours ago had vanished, swallowed by the forest. And the whispers. They were getting closer. The disappearing trail. Emily's breath hitched as she spun around, her phone's flashlight trembling in her grip. The trail was right here. We walked through it just a few hours ago. But now nothing. No path. No sign of the way they had come. Just an endless maze of trees stretching into darkness. Jake's voice was tight. Okay, this is getting weird. Maybe we just took a wrong turn." Sarah shook her head. No, Jake. The trail didn't move. It's gone. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. Liam's jaw clenched. Let's not panic. If we stick together, we can find a way back. We just need to. Snap. A branch cracked somewhere behind them. Low, deliberate. Like something was creeping closer. Emily whipped her light toward the sound, but the trees revealed nothing. Just shifting shadows swaying in the cold night air. And then, a whisper. Faint, crawling over their skin like ice. Turn around. The silent watchers. Liam's heart slammed against his ribs. He turned, his flashlight darting over the trees. Nothing. But his gut screamed that something was there. Watching. Sarah's fingers dug into his arm. Did you hear that? Jake swallowed hard. Yeah, and I don't want to know what it was. Emily gasped, stepping back. Guys, look. They all turned toward where her flashlight was pointing. Carved into the nearest tree trunk was a symbol, an eerie, twisted shape. Jagged, like it had been scratched in with sharp claws. And beneath it, the ground was different. A perfect circle of dead leaves, blackened as if burned. No wind disturbed them. No movement at all. Just deathly stillness. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. What is this? Liam bent down, his fingers hovering over the dead leaves. It's like something burned the ground here. Emily took a shaky step back. I don't like this. I really don't like this. The whisper returned. You've seen too much. This time it was closer. Almost right behind them. Jake spun around, fists clenched. Show yourself. But the only answer was silence. And then, a flicker of movement. Not in the trees. Not in the distance. But in their shadows. They twisted, stretched unnaturally along the ground, moving even though no one had shifted. Sarah's breath hitched. Our shadows there. The wind howled suddenly, making the fire flicker wildly. And in that brief, sputtering light, their shadows weren't their own anymore. They were taller, distorted, watching. Emily grabbed Liam's arm. We need to run. But as they turned, the whispers rose into a deafening chorus. And the fire went out. The fire dies. Darkness swallowed them whole. One moment the fire crackled, weak but present. The next it was gone, extinguished as if something had snuffed it out. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. Turn on your flashlights. Now! Liam fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking. The beam of light flickered on, cutting through the blackness, only for a moment. Then static. The screen glitched and the light died. Sarah let out a small, panicked sob. My flashlight's not working. Jake smacked the side of his phone. No, come on. Every single light had failed. And in the suffocating dark, the whispers returned. This time, they weren't distant. They were right next to them. You don't belong here. A rustling sound, low, deliberate, circled them. Footsteps. Bare feet on damp earth. Something moved. Something too close. Emily's fingers dug into Liam's arm. Who's there? No answer. Just slow, steady breathing in the dark. Then a touch. Cold. Bony. Fingertips brushing against Jake's shoulder. He yelped, stumbling backward. Something touched me. Liam reached out blindly, grabbing his arm. Stay together. We can't. A sharp crack echoed through the trees, like a branch snapping under heavy weight. Then another. And another. The sound was coming from all around them. Like something, or many things, were closing in. The circling shadows. The darkness felt alive. It pressed in, thick and suffocating, moving with them. Sarah clung to Emily. We have to get out of here. We can't just. A whisper cut her off. There is no way out. Something moved behind Liam. He spun, reaching into the void, only to grab nothing. But the feeling was there. A presence. Watching. Waiting. And then out of the blackness, fingers, long and gnarled, reaching toward him. Liam staggered back. Run! They bolted blindly into the dark, crashing through unseen branches, tripping over roots. The woods seemed endless, stretching forever. The whispers followed. Faster. Louder. A chorus of voices that weren't their own. Jake gasped, wheezing. We're going in circles. We're. He stopped. They all did. Because right in front of them, their campfire. Still dead. Still surrounded by that eerie circle of blackened leaves. Emily's voice was barely a breath. No, we just ran straight. How are we back here? Sarah let out a shaky sob. We're trapped. The wind picked up, swirling around them like unseen hands reaching, pulling them closer. And then, a single match flared to life. Its tiny flame hovered in midair, inches from Liam's face, revealing a figure standing right there, grinning. The floating flame. The match burned impossibly bright, casting flickering light across the figure's face. A man, if he could even be called that, stood inches from Liam. His face was wrong. Too wide. His grin stretched ear to ear, frozen and unnatural. His eyes, black voids, reflected the tiny flame as if swallowing its light. No one moved. No one breathed. The match burned lower. And then, in a single breath, it went out. Darkness slammed over them again, but the image of his twisted smile burned behind their eyelids. Then, a voice. Low. Amused. Too close. You can run. A pause. But you won't get far. Something cold brushed against Emily's hand. She screamed. Running blind. Jake grabbed her wrist. Go. Now. They ran. Through the pitch-black forest, tripping over unseen roots, scraping past clawing branches. The air grew thick, pressing in like unseen hands trying to pull them back. The whispers laughed. Not one voice, but many. Twisted, layered. Mocking. Sarah sobbed. Where are we going? There's no. She cut off with a gasp. Up ahead, a figure stood between the trees. Still. Silent. Grinning. The same man. But now there were two of him. One to their left. One to their right. Both identical. Both watching. Emily's chest tightened. That's impossible. Liam spun in a circle. More figures emerged from the trees. 3, 4, 6. Surrounding them. Each face wore the same wide, impossible grin. Each head tilted at the same angle. Jake backed up. No, no, no. Sarah grabbed his arm. We need to. The whisper came again. Close your eyes. Liam's breath hitched. What? If you want to live, close your eyes. The figures took a step closer, their grins never fading. Jake clenched his fists. What happens if we don't? The figures took another step. Emily swallowed. We don't have a choice. One by one, they squeezed their eyes shut. Darkness. Silence. Only the sound of their own ragged breathing. A long pause. Then, fingertips. Cold, bony, brushing against their faces. A whisper. See you soon. And just like that, the world went still. The wind stopped. The whispers vanished. Liam's hands shook. Is it over? No one dared to answer. Then slowly, terrified, Emily opened her eyes. The figures were gone. The forest was quiet again. For the first time since sunset, there was no sound. No whispering. Only trees. Only emptiness. Had they imagined it? Jake exhaled shakily. Let's get the hell out of here. Liam turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Yeah, but which way? Then Emily's phone buzzed. A notification. She snatched it from her pocket. The screen flickered, glitching. One new message. From an unknown number. The preview sent ice down her spine. 2 words. 2 simple words. Turn around. The message. Emily's fingers trembled as she stared at the glowing screen. The words turn around seemed to pulse, growing bolder, darker. Her breath hitched. Guys, I just got a message. Liam frowned. From who? Emily swallowed hard. I don't know. There's no number. Just this. She held up the screen. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. That wasn't there before. There's no signal out here. Jake took a step closer. Try calling back. Emily hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, she tapped the message. The screen glitched. Static crackled through the speaker. Then, a whisper. You shouldn't have looked. Emily dropped the phone. Oh my God. The screen went black. Liam clenched his jaw. That's it. We're getting out of here. Now. Jake spun in a circle, flashlight flickering. Which way? We've been running in circles for hours. Emily picked up her phone and checked the time. 1:13 a.m. The same time it had been when the fire first went out. Her heart skipped a beat. Something's wrong. Sarah shivered. No kidding. Emily's voice trembled. No, I mean time. It's not moving. They all stared at her screen. 1:13 a.m. Frozen. Liam looked at his own watch. Same time. Jake pulled out his phone. Mine too. Sarah gasped. What does that mean? Emily's voice was hollow. I think we're stuck. The road that wasn't there. Liam exhaled sharply. No, we're not playing this game. We keep moving. They walked. Fast. Sticking together. The trees seemed to shift around them, twisting, stretching. The path ahead was never quite the same. Then, after what felt like forever, Jake stopped short. Wait, he pointed. A road. A narrow dirt path cut through the trees, leading into the distance. It looked old, abandoned, but it was a way out. Sarah almost sobbed. Finally, they took off, following the path. Hope flickered in their chests. But then, Liam slowed. A sick feeling crawled up his spine. Something was wrong. The road looked familiar. Too familiar. Emily noticed it too. No, 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 no. Sarah turned, confused. What? Emily pointed to the trees lining the path. The markings on those trunks. The broken branch over there. We've been here before. Jake paled. That's not possible. Liam gritted his teeth. It's not just possible. It's happening. They had looped back. The road wasn't leading them out. It was leading them back in. A whisper slithered through the air. You can't leave. Emily clutched Liam's arm. What do we do? Silence. Then, Jake's voice was hollow. Do you hear that? A new sound. Not whispers. Not footsteps. But humming. A soft, eerie melody drifting through the trees. Growing closer. Liam turned toward the sound. And there, standing in the middle of the road, was a little girl. Wearing a white dress. Humming a song they didn't recognize. Her head tilted. Her lips curled into a too-wide grin. Then, in a voice that wasn't her own. You should have stayed in the circle. The humming stops. No one moved. No one breathed. The little girl stood in the middle of the road, her white dress stained with something dark. Her head tilted too far to the side, neck bending at an unnatural angle. And then, she stopped humming. The silence that followed was unbearable. Liam's throat was dry. Who are you? The girl didn't answer. She just smiled. A slow, stretched grin that reached her ears. Emily took a shaky step back. She's not real. She can't be real, Jake whispered. Then why is she looking right at us? The girl's black eyes flicked to him. She giggled. A sound too distorted, too layered, like multiple voices laughing at once. Then, in a whisper that wasn't hers, she spoke. You're lost. The words slithered into their ears, colder than the night air. And now you're mine. Then, she moved. Not walked. Not ran. She shifted. One moment she was standing in the road. The next, she was right in front of Jake. Smiling. Her fingers reached toward his face. Jake screamed. Nowhere is safe. Liam grabbed Jake and yanked him back. Run! They sprinted into the trees, branches tearing at their skin. The road vanished behind them, swallowed by the shifting darkness. The girl's laughter followed. Light. Playful. Hunting them. Sarah sobbed. We need to wake up. This isn't real. Emily tripped, falling hard against the dirt. Liam turned back, grabbing her hand. Get up. Get up. Footsteps. Close. Right behind them. Emily gasped as cold fingers brushed her ankle. She shrieked, kicking wildly. No. No. Liam yanked her up. They ran deeper, faster. Then, a clearing. Open space. And in the middle, the campfire. Still dead. Still surrounded by the eerie blackened leaves. Sarah clutched her head. No, we ran. How are we back here? A whisper. Soft. Close. Because you never left. Emily turned, heart hammering. The girl stood at the edge of the clearing. Still smiling. Still watching. But she wasn't alone anymore. Figures stood behind her. Grinning. Dozens of them. Surrounding the clearing. The whispers swelled, a chorus of voices speaking as one. The circle keeps you safe. Stay inside and they won't take you. But you left. Jake backed up. This isn't happening. The girl stepped forward. And now you're ours. The figures moved, closing in, grinning. And then, the fire roared to life. Flames shot up, bright and violent, casting long shadows across the clearing. The figures screamed. Not human screams. Something else. The girl shrieked, her wide smile twisting into something monstrous. The figures melted into the trees, their grins lingering in the darkness. The fire crackled. Jake collapsed to his knees, gasping. What just happened? Emily's hands were shaking. The fire, it kept them away. Liam looked at the untouched circle of blackened leaves around the flames. And a horrible realization hit him. This isn't a campsite, he whispered. Emily turned to him, confused. What? Liam's eyes darkened. It's a trap. The fire fades. The fire crackled violently, the heat searing against their skin as the shadows of the forest grew darker. The figures were gone, but the air felt thick, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Emily wiped her face with trembling hands. What was that? What the hell was that? Liam's eyes never left the fire. It's them. It's all of them. The forest, it's alive. Jake stood up, his face pale. No. No, we can't be stuck here. We can't be. The fire flickered. The warmth in the air vanished. The flames dimmed. Emily's heart dropped. No, not again. Liam stood up, pulling her to her feet. Get back. Stay in the circle. The figures were returning. The trees seemed to bend toward them, their branches groaning, reaching, writhing like living creatures. The air felt cold again, too cold. The circle was their only hope. Sarah's voice was a whisper. Liam, what do we do? Liam's mind raced. We need to stay inside the circle. If we break it, the whispers returned. Low. Sinister. You thought the fire kept you safe. The figures stepped out from the trees, their bodies half hidden in the shadows. One of them stepped forward, his grin widening. His face twisted in a way that defied logic. You're wrong. And then, he stepped into the fire. The flames screamed. Not a roar, but a howl like something trapped, desperate to escape. The fire flickered violently, then swirled into a black smoke, consuming the figure's form. And then it was gone. The fire went out, and they were plunged into darkness. The lost circle. Get back! Liam shouted, pulling everyone into the center of the clearing. They huddled together, fear thick in the air. Sarah held her breath. What just happened? The circle, Liam whispered, his voice trembling. It's gone. A scream split the air. It was Sarah. She clutched at her chest, her face twisted in pain. I can't breathe. The ground beneath them cracked. A low, rumbling sound shook the earth. The trees, they were closing in. The figures weren't just watching them anymore. They were moving in. Jake pulled at Sarah's arm, but her body was shaking violently. Sarah, focus. But she wasn't there. Her eyes rolled back, her lips parted in a silent scream. Then, from the darkness, a voice emerged. You were never meant to escape. And that's when they saw it. The ground began to twist beneath them, roots crawling out like hands, grabbing, pulling, at their feet. They were being dragged toward the trees. No, Liam yelled, struggling against the roots, but they tightened, pulling him closer to the waiting figures. Emily screamed. Help! Somebody! The ground cracked open beneath them. The figures rushed forward. And then, the little girl appeared. Her body floating above the ground, twisted, inhuman. Her grin had turned into a horrifying, gaping maw. You can't leave. The darkness around them thickened. The trees twisted into shapes they couldn't comprehend, their branches stretching like skeletal hands. The world around them seemed to bend, collapse. There was no escape. 3, the final whisper. Liam! Emily cried, struggling to break free. But the ground swallowed her. The figures encircled them. Liam's vision blurred as the shadows closed in, their whispers growing louder, overpowering. You're part of the forest now. You never should have tried to leave. The little girl's voice echoed through the dark. Now you're mine. Forever. The darkness consumed them. And the whispers never stopped. Trapped in the dark. There was no air. There was no light. Only the thick, suffocating darkness that pressed in on them from all sides. Liam tried to scream, but his throat felt like it was full of mud. His body was numb, unable to move, as though the earth itself had swallowed him whole. He could feel the cold grip of the forest wrapping around him, squeezing the life out of him. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear Emily's voice, weak, desperate. Liam, please, where are you? He tried to respond, but his voice was swallowed by the blackness. His hands twitched, feeling the ground beneath him. Dirt. Wet. His mind raced, struggling to make sense of what was happening. Were they still in the clearing? Or had they been pulled deeper into the forest, into the heart of Black Hollow itself? There was a noise, a crackling sound, something moving, a shift, a presence. And then, a whisper. You're not dead. Liam's heart stopped. But you will be soon. The voice came from everywhere. It wasn't the girls. It wasn't the figures. It was something older. Something that had been here long before them. He tried to call out again, but his body refused to obey. The ground beneath him shifted once more, and then he felt something cold brush against his skin. Fingers. Cold, long fingers like roots of the trees. They were pulling him down. The old ones. Liam's body jerked violently as if he had been thrown. He landed hard on something wet, soft. The ground was moving beneath him. It was alive. The trees, they were alive. The whispers returned, louder now, swirling in his ears. He could barely make out their words. You thought you could escape. You thought the fire would save you. Liam tried to move, to crawl away, but the forest was alive, twisting, pulling, trapping him in its depths. The very air felt thick with malice. Suddenly, a figure appeared before him, emerging from the shadows like a wraith. A man. No, not a man. His face was a hollow mask, his eyes black pits, his body bent and twisted like the very trees around them. Liam tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come. The figure raised a hand, and Liam felt the cold rush of death wash over him. He knew this thing, whatever it was, wasn't human. It was something older. Something from the very core of Black Hollow. The figure smiled. You're too late. It lifted Liam into the air, his body weightless. His mind screamed, but no sound came. The ground beneath him cracked open, revealing a chasm of darkness, and the figure's hollow voice whispered once more. Welcome to your grave. The sacrifice. Liam was falling into the darkness. He could feel the weight of the void around him, the crushing, suffocating pressure that seemed to press down on his chest. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. And then, the ground stopped. He slammed into something soft like mud, but it was warm. His body trembled with exhaustion, but he forced his eyes open. And then he saw them. The others. Trapped in the same place. The same dark void. Sarah was beside him, her eyes wide and terrified. Emily was huddled against a tree, her face streaked with tears. Jake was curled up, shaking. The figures were all around them. And at the center, the girl. Her smile was wider now, a grotesque, sickening thing. You didn't listen. Her voice was like nails on glass, sharp and unforgiving. Liam tried to move, but he couldn't. It was as if the ground was holding him in place. The figures stepped forward, their hands reaching for them. The whispers grew louder, blending together until it was a cacophony of death. It's time to complete the circle. And as the figures closed in, Liam knew he would never leave Black Hollow. They would never leave. The forest had claimed them. The circle closes. The figures were all around them, their cold, dead hands reaching out with purpose. The whispers intensified, no longer just words but a song, a haunting lullaby that made the blood in Liam's veins run cold. You thought you could break the curse. You thought you could escape. Liam's heart hammered in his chest, each beat louder than the last. His eyes darted to Sarah, to Emily, to Jake. They were all trapped in the same nightmare. The forest had changed. The trees twisted like tortured souls, their bark gnarled and warped. The ground pulsed beneath them, as if the earth itself was alive, feeding off their fear. And at the center of it all, the girl. Her grin had grown wider, her eyes black voids that swallowed the light. She was no longer just an innocent child. She was the forest's heart, the soul of Black Hollow. Her voice rang out again, sweet and cold. Now you're part of it. You're part of me. The choice. The air turned cold. Liam could feel the pull, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. There was no escape. The forest had won. But then, he heard something. A voice. Fight, Liam. It was Emily's voice. Fight for us. Liam's eyes shot to her. She was shaking, but there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of hope, no matter how small. What do we do? Liam whispered. Emily's lips trembled. We have to make the choice. We can't just let them. The figure that had been standing next to Emily stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. No one leaves this place. And then Liam saw it. A faint glimmer in the distance. A small opening, like a tear in the darkness. The edge of the forest, the edge of the curse. It was their last chance. He could feel the weight of the decision. Sacrifice one to save them all. The escape. Liam stepped forward. His mind raced. If I go alone, maybe they'll live. Maybe they'll find a way out. But Emily shook her head, her voice cracking. No, Liam. We fight. Together. The figures surrounded them, their hands reaching with desperation. But Emily stood firm, her feet planted in the dirt. Liam clenched his fists. The fire inside him, that spark of survival, had ignited once more. With every ounce of strength left in him, he shouted, We're not part of you. We'll never be part of you. The girl's face twisted, her grin faltering for a brief moment. You will be mine. The ground beneath them cracked open again, and the shadows lunged forward. But just as they did, Emily pushed forward. In one final, desperate motion, she reached for the girl. Her fingers brushed against the girl's hand, and then everything went silent. The forest froze. The figures stopped. And then the light returned. The price. Liam's heart raced as the world around them seemed to explode in a brilliant flash of light. The forest screamed, a final, deafening roar that echoed into nothingness. The shadows collapsed, and the air became still. The earth that had been so alive now lay silent. They were free. But the price? Liam turned to Emily. Her face was pale, her body trembling. She reached out to him. Liam, are we safe? He wanted to say yes. But something in his gut told him otherwise. Because Emily was gone. Her body fell to the ground, lifeless. The forest had taken her. Her sacrifice had been the key. She had become part of Black Hollow, just as the others had before her. Liam fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. No, Emily. But there was no answer. The forest had claimed its toll. The curse was complete. Liam was the last one left. The last survivor. The echoes. Liam staggered through the remains of the forest, his body weak and broken. The darkness was lifting, but he could still hear the whispers, echoes of the past, of those who had never escaped. You'll always be part of it. Liam's mind broke under the weight of the words. He had escaped the forest, but it had followed him. He would never be free. And in the stillness of Black Hollow, as the trees swayed in the wind, he heard it, one final whisper. The forest always wins. And then silence. The end. Subscribe to my channel Howl. The next story, The Whispering Pines. The invitation arrived on a crisp fall morning, tucked neatly into an envelope. It was from an old friend, urging the group to join him on a camping trip in the remote wilderness, a place deep in the heart of a vast forest known as the Whispering Pines. He promised an adventure filled with peace, tranquility, and a chance to reconnect with nature. Little did they know, the forest had secrets that would change their lives forever. The invitation. When the message arrived, it was almost as if fate had pushed them to accept. After months of the daily grind, work, school, and the relentless demands of life, the opportunity seemed like a gift. 5 friends, close since childhood, all equally in need of an escape, agreed without hesitation. The promise of fresh air, untouched nature, and bonding time was enough to pull them away from their routines and into the unknown. Ryan, the one who had extended the invitation, was known for his love of adventure. His messages had always been filled with excitement, filled with phrases like, "We need to disconnect," and "There's no better place to unwind than the wild." To him, the wilderness was a second home, and he always found solace in its quiet embrace. So, when he mentioned the Whispering Pines, an obscure and remote area deep in the woods, they trusted him completely. The name alone evoked curiosity, but none of them had ever been there. The others were Emily, Jack, Sarah, and Mike. They were inseparable, bound by years of memories, shared laughter, inside jokes, and the occasional high school drama that had come and gone. They were the kind of friends who knew each other inside out, and a camping trip sounded like the perfect escape from their busy lives. It was Emily who first voiced her concern, though it was more out of curiosity than real apprehension. "Do any of you know about this place? The Whispering Pines? I've never heard of it before. It seems remote. Are we sure it's safe?" Ryan chuckled, waving away her concerns. "It's more than safe, it's peaceful. Just imagine, no distractions, no city noise. Just you, the stars, and the forest." "Sounds perfect," Jack chimed in, his voice lighthearted. He was always the adventurous one, the first to suggest doing something out of the ordinary. "I could use some time away from the city. It'll be like our own little slice of paradise." Mike nodded in agreement. "I'm in. It'll be a good break before everything gets crazy with work." Sarah was silent for a moment, her mind running through the details. She wasn't one to take risks, but the idea of a break, the chance to reconnect, and the comfort of being with her closest friends overpowered any doubts she had. "Yeah, let's do it. I think we all need this." And with that, the decision was made. The planning began in earnest. Ryan had already arranged the permits, the gear, and the supplies needed for the journey. They would drive up on Friday evening, set up camp, and stay until Sunday. Ryan assured them the journey wouldn't be too difficult, just a couple of hours of hiking from the nearest town, and the rest would be a peaceful, easygoing time spent by the campfire. The night before the trip, Emily had a strange feeling. It wasn't a feeling of fear, more of a nagging sense of unease. As she packed her bag, she recalled a conversation she had overheard while working at the local coffee shop a few days ago. A man had been talking to his friend about the Whispering Pines, speaking in hushed tones about the strange things that happened there. At the time, Emily had dismissed it as nothing more than the ramblings of an old man. But now that she was preparing for the trip, the words echoed in her mind. "Stay away from the Whispering Pines," he had warned. "No one who goes there ever leaves the same." The thought made her shiver, but she quickly brushed it aside. It was probably just another local superstition. She had heard of similar stories in the past, tales of haunted places and cursed lands, and had always dismissed them. But something about this felt different. Still, Emily wasn't one to let fears control her, and she decided to keep the unease to herself. The next morning, the group gathered in the parking lot of their local convenience store, loading up their gear into the back of Ryan's van. The drive was filled with chatter, laughter, and the excitement of what lay ahead. They drove for hours, leaving behind the hustle of the city and slowly descending into the quiet embrace of the countryside. As they approached the turnoff to the Whispering Pines, the air seemed to shift. The atmosphere was thicker, the air heavier with something almost imperceptible. The further they went, the fewer signs of civilization they encountered. The paved road faded into a dirt trail, and the trees grew taller and denser, blocking out the sun in places. There were no other cars, no signs of other travelers. Emily looked out the window, noticing the absence of wildlife. There were no birds singing, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The silence was unsettling. "I don't know why, but I feel like we're going too far off the beaten path," she remarked, her voice almost a whisper. Ryan smiled and glanced back at her. "That's the point, Emily. You wanted peace and quiet, and you're going to get it. Besides, the road ahead is just a bit more rugged. We'll be there in no time." But as the miles stretched on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into something unknown, something that might not welcome them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of winding roads, they reached the entrance to the forest. The trees stood tall and ancient, their gnarled branches twisting into the sky like fingers reaching toward the heavens. The wind whispered through the leaves, but there was no breeze. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Ryan parked the van, and they all stepped out into the clearing, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. The campsite was just a short hike ahead, and after a brief discussion, they gathered their gear and began their journey into the forest. The path was narrow, lined with thick trees that seemed to close in around them. Every step felt muffled, as though the forest itself was swallowing the sound of their movements. The farther they walked, the more oppressive the silence became. There were no sounds of wildlife, no distant calls of birds or insects. Just an unsettling stillness. "This place feels off," Emily muttered, her eyes darting nervously around the shadows of the trees. Ryan laughed, trying to ease the tension. "It's just nature, Em. You're overthinking it. The Whispering Pines is known for being quiet. That's all. Nothing to be afraid of." But even as he spoke, Ryan's voice seemed to fade into the silence around them, swallowed up by the forest. The air was heavy, and the trees loomed taller than any they had seen before. It was as if they had crossed into a different world, one that was both ancient and timeless. They reached the campsite by late afternoon, a small clearing beside a stream that seemed to hum with a quiet, almost melodic sound. The friends quickly set up their tents, gathering around the fire pit to prepare for the night ahead. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. As evening fell, the forest seemed to come alive in a way that was both beautiful and eerie. The breeze rustled the leaves, and the faint sound of the stream provided a calming backdrop to their laughter. Yet, as the shadows grew longer, a sense of unease crept over them all. It was as if the forest was watching, waiting. The first night passed uneventfully. But as they sat around the campfire, telling stories and roasting marshmallows, Emily couldn't help but feel a nagging sense that something wasn't right. She heard faint whispers, barely audible above the crackling fire. She glanced around, but her friends were too busy to notice. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, from deep within the trees, but when she tried to focus, they stopped. Her heart began to race, but she dismissed it as nerves. "Let's get some sleep," Jack suggested, his voice cheerful. "Tomorrow's going to be another great day." But as Emily crawled into her tent that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. The whispers continued, faint but persistent, like a warning carried on the wind. She pulled the covers tighter around her and closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Little did she know, the whispers were only the beginning. The unseen. The following morning, the The sunlight barely pierced through the thick canopy of trees, casting the campsite in a perpetual half-light. The stillness of the forest, however, seemed to have deepened overnight. There was an almost unnatural silence, broken only by the soft chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. The breeze from the night before had vanished, leaving behind a dense, suffocating air. Emily woke up early, still unsettled by the previous night's whispers. She sat up in her sleeping bag, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees as if searching for the source of the voices. But everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary. She shook her head, trying to push the feeling away. It was probably just her imagination running wild. She unzipped her tent and stepped outside. The campfire had long since died down, leaving only a few charred remains and the lingering scent of smoke. Her friends were already up, gathered around the cooler and preparing breakfast. The forest, still and quiet, seemed almost too calm, as if holding its breath. "Morning, Em," Ryan called out as he noticed her standing by the tent. "You sleep okay?" Emily nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I don't know. Something about this place feels off." Ryan chuckled, pouring coffee into a mug. "I told you it's just the forest. You're not used to this kind of peace. It's a bit different, I'll give you that." But Emily wasn't convinced. There was something more to it, something lurking just beneath the surface. Her gaze wandered to the trees at the edge of the clearing, where the shadows seemed deeper than usual. She didn't remember them being that dark the night before. The air around her felt heavier, as if the forest was watching, waiting for something to happen. Jack and Sarah were already digging through their backpacks, preparing for a hike later that morning. "We're going to explore the area a bit today," Jack said, his voice full of excitement. "Ryan says there's a great spot a couple of miles out. I'll bet it's perfect for pictures." "Pictures of what?" Emily asked, her voice betraying her discomfort. "The trees? The silence?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Hey, come on, Em. It's not like the whole forest is going to eat us. Don't let a little weird feeling ruin the fun." Emily forced a laugh, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm not worried about the forest eating us, Jack. I don't know, something about this place gives me the creeps." Ryan put his hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her. "I get it, Em. I've been here before, and yeah, it's not like other places. But that's why it's special. No distractions. Just us and nature." But as Emily stood there, listening to their carefree chatter, she couldn't shake the sense of dread gnawing at the back of her mind. She had seen too many horror movies, read too many ghost stories, to ignore the signs. It wasn't just the silence or the strange whispers. There was a deep, unsettling feeling that someone was watching them. The group set out for their hike later in the morning, the narrow trail winding deeper into the forest. The air was thick with humidity, and the trees closed in on them, blocking out much of the sunlight. The sounds of birds and insects had faded into the distance, leaving only the occasional creak of branches and the crunch of leaves underfoot. As they walked, Emily found herself lingering behind the group, her eyes darting nervously from side to side. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but every so often, she thought she saw a figure standing just out of view between the trees. It was always gone before she could fully focus on it, and each time she blinked, it seemed to vanish like a shadow. Mike noticed her hesitation and slowed his pace to walk alongside her. "You okay, Em?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though it felt like a lie. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just trying to shake this feeling. It's like I'm being watched." Mike raised an eyebrow. "By who?" "There's no one out here. Just us, the trees, and whatever animals are lurking around." "I know, but I keep thinking I see someone standing just off the trail. It's probably nothing, but I can't shake it." "You're just spooked," Mike said with a shrug. "It happens. It's easy to get creeped out in places like this. But I promise, it's just the woods playing tricks on you." Emily wanted to believe him, but the unease in her chest wouldn't go away. She tried to push the thought aside and caught up with the group. Ryan was ahead, pointing out a large rock formation in the distance that he claimed was a great spot for pictures. They continued walking for another hour, the forest growing thicker around them. The trail narrowed, and the trees seemed to grow taller, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead. It felt as though they were entering another world, one where time stood still and the world outside no longer mattered. Eventually, they reached a clearing with a large, wide rock, just as Ryan had promised. The sunlight filtered through the trees above, casting dappled patterns on the ground. It was the perfect spot for photos, and the group scattered to take pictures and explore. As she moved deeper into the woods, she heard it again, the faint whispering. At first, it was barely audible, just a soft murmur, like a conversation in the distance. But the more she listened, the clearer it became. It was calling her name. Emily. Her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, but there was no one there. The forest was as silent as ever, except for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Her breath caught in her throat as she felt her skin prickle with cold. Emily. The voice came again, this time closer. She could feel it, the presence of something, someone nearby. She took a hesitant step backward, her eyes scanning the trees, but there was nothing. No one. Just the forest, stretching endlessly in every direction. She took another step back, her pulse racing, but her foot caught on a root, sending her stumbling to the ground. As she scrambled to her feet, her eyes fell upon something in the dirt, something strange. A small, wooden carving lay there, half buried in the leaves. It was shaped like a twisted figure, a dark, abstract shape with sharp angles. It looked almost unnatural. Her heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps. There was something about that carving, something dark and twisted, that sent a wave of nausea through her. The whispering came again, louder this time. "Leave this place." Emily turned and bolted back toward the group, her legs burning as she sprinted through the trees. She didn't look back. All she wanted was to be with her friends, to feel safe again. When she finally reached the clearing, she found Ryan and the others standing by the rock, talking and laughing as if nothing had happened. But Emily knew something had changed. The forest was no longer peaceful. It was watching them. The unease settled over her like a heavy cloak, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in the whispering pines was beginning to take notice of them. Emily, however, felt the weight of the forest closing in around her. The stillness was almost suffocating, and she couldn't help but glance nervously over her shoulder every few moments. It felt as if the woods themselves were closing in on them, pushing them deeper into its heart. She moved away from the group, wandering toward the edge of the clearing, where the trees seemed even denser. The air here felt different, colder, heavier, as though the temperature had dropped a few degrees. She didn't know why, but something compelled her to keep walking. She had to get away from the others, away from the feeling that something was wrong. The hollow echoes. The group settled around the campfire that night, the warmth of the flames offering little comfort against the thick, suffocating air that seemed to have taken hold of the forest. Emily sat apart from the others, her eyes constantly darting toward the trees, watching for any sign of movement. She tried to push the feeling aside, but the whispering from earlier kept echoing in her mind, growing louder with each passing minute. "So, Em, what's going on?" Ryan asked, noticing her distant gaze. "You seem a little off." "You all right?" Emily forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Ryan raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. He knew Emily well enough to know that when she got quiet, there was usually something bothering her. But he also knew she wouldn't talk about it unless she was ready. Jack, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to her unease. "This place is amazing," he said, his voice full of excitement. "The pictures I'm getting are going to be insane. I'm telling you, this is the best spot we've found in a long time." "I'm glad you're enjoying it," Emily muttered, her gaze flicking back to the forest's edge. She could feel the weight of the trees pressing in on her, as if they were closing in, watching, waiting. Sarah, sensing Emily's discomfort, gave her a reassuring smile. "You know, it's probably just the atmosphere," she said softly. "It's a little creepy out here, but I'm sure it's just your mind playing tricks." "I don't know, Sarah," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. "There's something wrong with this place. I feel like it's watching us, like it knows we're here." Sarah looked at her, her expression softening. "Look, I get it. The woods can be unsettling, especially when you're out here at night. But we're fine. It's just your imagination." Emily didn't respond. She wanted to believe Sarah, but the unease gnawing at her gut wouldn't go away. She glanced toward the shadows beyond the campfire, her mind swirling with unease. The whispering had come from somewhere deeper in the woods, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the wind. It was something else. A chill ran down her spine, and she suddenly stood up, her legs trembling. "I need some air," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else, and before anyone could respond, she turned and walked into the darkness of the forest. "Emily, wait!" Ryan called out, but she didn't stop. She needed to be alone, to clear her mind, to make sense of the voices that haunted her. The moon was hidden behind a thick veil of clouds, and the forest around her was drowned in darkness. Emily stumbled through the underbrush, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step felt heavier, as though the ground beneath her was trying to pull her down. The trees creaked in the wind, but it wasn't the same sound as before. It was different, deeper. The further she walked, the more suffocating the air became. It felt as if the very forest itself was alive, breathing around her, closing in. "Leave now." The whisper came again, clear as day, so close that it made Emily stop in her tracks. Her breath caught in her throat. She spun around, her eyes searching the darkness, but there was nothing there. The trees were still. The air was still. Emily! Her name, soft and coaxing, floated through the air. She felt her legs go weak, and for a moment, she almost gave in. The voice, so familiar, so comforting, almost convinced her to turn back, to go toward it. But something stopped her. Something deep inside her warned her that whatever it was that called her name, it wasn't friendly. It wasn't human. She forced herself to keep moving, pushing through the thick underbrush, her heart racing. She couldn't see, couldn't hear anything except the rush of blood in her ears, the pulse of panic urging her to flee. And then ahead, through the trees, she saw it. A figure standing still just at the edge of the clearing. It was tall, shadowy, and it seemed to be watching her, unmoving. Emily froze, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It wasn't one of her friends. It wasn't anyone she recognized. The figure seemed almost unnatural, its edges blurred and distorted, as if it wasn't entirely part of the world around it. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't right. This wasn't just the woods playing tricks on her. She could feel it now, the thick, oppressive presence that surrounded her, pressing in from all sides. Without thinking, she turned and ran, faster than she had ever run in her life. The footsteps behind her were soft at first, almost inaudible, but they grew louder with every step. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if the forest itself were conspiring to trap her. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't. She just had to keep running. But no matter how fast she ran, no matter how much distance she put between herself and the figure, it always seemed to be right behind her, getting closer. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily burst back into the clearing where the campfire had been, her chest heaving, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Her friends were still there, but they looked at her with confusion and concern. "Emily, what's wrong?" Ryan asked, his voice laced with worry. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Emily collapsed to her knees, her mind spinning, her heart still racing. I don't know. There's something in the woods, something following me." "Okay, take a deep breath," Sarah said gently, crouching beside her. "You've been out there alone too long. You're just scared. The forest plays tricks on your mind." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had felt it, seen it. Whatever it was, it had been in the woods, watching her. And it wasn't going away. "Listen to me," Emily said, her voice trembling. "We need to leave. We need to go now." Ryan frowned. "What are you talking about? It's late. You're exhausted. We'll be fine. We're almost done with the hike." "No," Emily whispered urgently. "We're not fine. I don't care what you think. Something is out there and we're not safe." The others exchanged uncertain glances, their concern mounting. Jack opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, there was a sudden noise, like the sound of something snapping in the woods. Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The group fell silent, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing. Then, as if in answer to her question, the whispering began again, soft and distant at first, then growing louder, closer. "Emily, The thing in the woods. The whispering grew louder, clearer, until it filled the air, surrounding them on all sides. Emily's breath hitched in her throat as her eyes darted around the clearing. There was no mistaking it now. The voice was coming from the forest. But it wasn't just one voice. There were multiple voices, layered over one another, low and guttural. The others could hear it now too. Ryan's face turned pale as he gripped his flashlight tightly, the beam trembling in his hand. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear. "That's not possible," she said shakily. "There's no one else out there." But Emily knew better. She had seen it, the figure in the woods, watching her, following her. And now it was calling out, taunting them, inviting them closer. The wind howled through the trees, and the fire crackled violently, casting strange, twisting shadows across the camp. Emily could feel the pressure building, as though the forest itself was closing in, suffocating them, trapping them in its grip. "Listen to me," Emily whispered urgently, her voice hoarse. "We need to go. Right now. Whatever that is, it's not natural." Ryan shook his head. "Em, calm down. We're okay. You're just freaking yourself out. It's probably some animal or—" "No," Emily interrupted, her voice rising with panic. "It's not an animal. It's something else. Something that shouldn't be here." Before Ryan could respond, the sound of branches cracking echoed through the trees, followed by heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate. The noise was too heavy to be just an animal. And it was coming closer. A cold chill swept through the group, and the fire flickered violently before going out completely. Darkness enveloped them, swallowing the clearing whole. The sound of footsteps was now accompanied by a low, guttural growl, like the rumble of something massive, something ancient. Jack fumbled for his flashlight, finally managing to turn it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the thick, shadowed trees. But the growl continued, echoing from the depths of the woods, closer now, too close. "This isn't happening," Ryan muttered, his voice shaking. He took a step back, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "We need to get out of here. Now." But as he turned to look for their backpacks, a figure appeared in the clearing. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and thin, its features distorted in the dim light. Its face was a twisted mask of dark shadows and hollow eyes, its skin a sickly gray, stretched tight over its bones. The thing, whatever it was, moved slowly, almost deliberately, toward them, its limbs jerking unnaturally as though it were a puppet on strings. The air grew colder, the very atmosphere becoming heavy with dread. "Emily," the creature rasped, its voice an eerie whisper that seemed to carry on the wind. "Come to me." The group recoiled in horror, backing away from the figure. The whispering grew louder again, now mingling with the creature's raspy voice, creating an unsettling cacophony of sound. "Stay back," Ryan shouted, his voice barely audible over the growing noise. He raised the flashlight as if it could protect them, though they all knew it was useless. The creature stopped just a few feet from them, its head tilting to the side in a way that no human, or any living creature, should be able to do. It let out a high-pitched, bone-chilling screech, and the shadows around them seemed to come alive, swirling around the group, pressing in on them from all sides. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the creature reached out, its long, bony fingers extending toward her. The cold from its touch was enough to make her blood run cold, and she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Suddenly, a blast of wind cut through the clearing, knocking them all off their feet. The creature stumbled backward, screeching in fury. Emily scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to run," she screamed. Without thinking, she turned and bolted, her legs moving faster than they ever had before. Behind her, she could hear the others following, their footsteps quick and frantic. The darkness was oppressive, the trees now twisting into strange shapes that seemed to reach for them, clawing at their skin. The creature's screech echoed in the distance, but Emily didn't dare look back. She couldn't. She just had to keep running, had to escape whatever that thing was. As they ran, the forest seemed to stretch endlessly before them. The path they had come from was gone, swallowed up by the twisted, unnatural woods that now surrounded them. The air was thick with fog, and the shadows seemed to follow them, never letting up. They ran for what felt like hours, though time seemed to have lost all meaning. Emily's chest burned with every breath, and her legs felt like lead, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Finally, the trees began to thin, and they stumbled into a clearing. The night sky was still overcast, but there was a faint light now, the first sign of dawn creeping over the horizon. They had made it out of the woods. But even then, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Where are we?" Ryan panted, looking around. He was covered in dirt, sweat dripping from his face. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind was racing. What had they just encountered? What was that thing? "We need to get back to the campsite," she said hoarsely. "Now." But even as she spoke, she could feel it. The presence. It hadn't gone away. The whispering was still there, just beneath the surface, waiting. The hollow trees. The group moved cautiously through the clearing, their bodies still trembling from the encounter. Emily's mind raced with questions, none of which had clear answers. Her gaze shifted between her friends, each of them visibly shaken. They had barely escaped the creature in the woods, and now the air felt charged, almost electric, like a storm was building. As they walked, the sun began to rise, casting pale light through the trees, but it did little to dispel the lingering sense of dread. The forest felt wrong. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Each step was harder than the last, as though the earth itself was trying to hold them in place. "There's something wrong here," Jack muttered, his voice low and uncertain. "This place, it's not just haunted. It's alive." Emily didn't need to hear more. She felt it too, the weight of something ancient and malevolent pressing down on them, suffocating them. They needed to get out, but they had no idea where they were anymore. The path they had followed was long gone, replaced by a labyrinth of twisted trees and dense fog. "What happened back there?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "What the hell was that thing?" "I don't know," Emily replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But I know we're not safe here. We need to find the way out." They pressed on, walking through the mist, their eyes scanning the eerie landscape. The trees around them were thick and tall, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their bark scarred and peeling as if something had clawed at them. Some of the trees had hollowed out centers, large openings that seemed to draw them in, as if the trees themselves were waiting to swallow them whole. "Do you see that?" Sarah asked, pointing toward a group of particularly large trees ahead of them. Those trees, they looked different. Emily turned her head, her stomach sinking as she noticed what Sarah was pointing to. The trees were massive, their trunks almost smooth, a stark contrast to the jagged, twisted ones around them. Their bark was pale and silver, reflecting the dim light of the morning like mirrors. And within each of these trees there was an opening, a hollow, darkened mouth that seemed to beckon them closer. For a moment, Emily hesitated. There was something unsettling about those trees, something unnatural. She could feel it deep in her gut, the pull of something dark, something ancient. "We need to keep moving," Emily said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Let's not go near those." But it was too late. Ryan, who had been quiet for a long time, suddenly took a step toward the trees. His eyes were wide, unblinking, as if he were in a trance. The group tried to call out to him, but it was as if he couldn't hear them. "Ryan!" Jack shouted, rushing forward to grab his arm. Ryan didn't respond. He just stood there, staring into the hollow of one of the trees, his breath shallow and quick. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't like him. Something was wrong. Without thinking, Emily rushed forward, grabbing Ryan's other arm and pulling him back. "Ryan, snap out of it," she yelled. Finally, his gaze broke from the tree, and he blinked, disoriented. What happened?" "You were staring at the tree," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It was like you were hypnotized." Ryan shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "I don't know. I just felt like I had to look inside." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Whatever had drawn Ryan to that tree, it wasn't natural. And if it could affect him like that, it could affect them all. "We need to leave." "Now," Emily said, her voice urgent. "This place isn't safe." But before they could turn around, the whispering began again. It was faint at first, a barely audible murmur carried on the wind. But then it grew louder, clearer, until it filled the air once more. And this time it wasn't just a voice. It was a chorus, a dozen voices, all speaking at once, overlapping each other in a maddening cacophony. Emily's eyes widened in horror as the voices grew more distinct. They were calling to her, pleading with her, urging her to come closer. She covered her ears, trying to block it out, but the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. Then, through the darkness and mist, she saw it. The shape in the trees. It was tall, shadowed, and its form was twisted, like it had been stretched and distorted by some unseen force. The thing seemed to be made of shadows and darkness, its edges constantly shifting and flickering like a flame. Its face was an inky void, an empty, gaping hole that seemed to suck the light from around it. "Get back!" Emily screamed, pulling her friends toward her, away from the tree. But it was too late. The creature moved, its body writhing and contorting as it stepped out of the shadows. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its fingers twisted and clawed, reaching for them with a terrifying slowness. Each movement seemed deliberate, calculated, as though it knew exactly what it was doing. "Run!" Emily yelled. But none of them moved. It was as if their bodies were frozen in place, held by some invisible force. The creature's whispering had taken hold of them, its voice seeping into their minds, filling them with dread and despair. The creature's mouth opened, a dark void that stretched wider than should have been possible. And from within that darkness came the words that would haunt them forever. "Come to me." The darkness unleashed. The words echoed through the forest, growing louder and more insistent. Emily could feel the air around them press down like a physical weight, suffocating them with the creature's unnatural presence. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her body felt paralyzed, frozen in place by the same unseen force that had gripped them all. The creature's hollow eyes, if they could even be called eyes, seemed to lock onto her, its gaze unblinking, unrelenting. It stepped closer, each movement slow and deliberate, as if savoring their terror. Its claws scraped against the bark of the trees, sending a shiver of dread down Emily's spine. "Come to me," it whispered again, its voice now a low, guttural rasp. The air vibrated with the sound, the very ground beneath their feet trembling in response. It was calling her. No, not just her, them. The creature was calling to all of them, pulling them in with an irresistible force, a compulsion that was impossible to ignore. Emily felt her mind beginning to slip, the edges of her consciousness blurring. She could feel herself being drawn toward the thing, her legs moving of their own accord, as if she were sleepwalking. "Don't listen to it." Jack's voice pierced through the fog of her thoughts, and Emily snapped back to reality, blinking rapidly. His face was pale with fear, his hands gripping his flashlight so tightly his knuckles were white. He was trying to move, but like the rest of them, he couldn't. But the creature's whispering was getting louder, more urgent, more insistent. Emily could feel its power closing in on her, filling her thoughts, drowning out everything else. "We have to go, we have to run," she thought to herself desperately, trying to fight the overwhelming pull of the creature's voice. Then, with a sudden surge of adrenaline, Emily broke free. Her legs moved on their own, propelling her backward, away from the creature. She barely noticed her friends following her, their feet pounding the earth in frantic synchrony. The creature's growl of frustration sounded behind them, a low, rumbling growl that sent chills down Emily's spine. She didn't dare look back. They had to escape. But the forest was shifting. The path they had followed earlier was now gone, swallowed up by the growing mist. Every tree around them looked the same, twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like claws. The world seemed to close in, as if the forest was alive, pushing them toward the thing in the trees. "Where's the way out?" Sarah gasped, her voice hoarse with fear. "I don't know," Emily cried. "It's like the trees are closing in on us." Panic began to rise in her chest. They were trapped, lost in this cursed forest, with no way to escape. The creature's presence was suffocating, its whispers continuing to plague their thoughts. And then Emily saw it. At first, it was a faint outline, barely visible in the fog. But as they stumbled forward, she saw it more clearly. A massive stone archway, partially covered by vines, standing like a forgotten relic in the middle of the forest. "There!" Emily shouted, pointing toward the archway. "There's a way out." Without thinking, she ran toward it, her friends following close behind. They reached the arch, its cold stone walls looming over them. The air felt different here, less suffocating, almost like a barrier between them and the forest. But the whispers still clawed at their minds, relentless and maddening. "Is this it?" Jack asked, his voice trembling. "Is this the way out?" Before Emily could answer, a voice, a real voice, shouted from behind them. "Wait!" They turned to see Ryan standing several feet away, his expression vacant, his body still moving toward them, though slowly, as if under some kind of trance. "Ryan!" "No!" Emily cried, reaching out to him. But he didn't respond. He was too far gone, the creature's whispers having taken full hold of him. His eyes were empty, his face an eerie mask of calm. "No! Ryan, fight it!" Sarah shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. The creature's voice echoed again, this time deeper, more menacing. "Come to me. Ryan." Ryan's lips parted, and for a moment, Emily thought he might break free. But then, with terrifying speed, he sprinted toward the creature, his feet pounding against the earth in a frantic, almost robotic manner. His body jerked unnaturally, his arms stretched wide as if embracing the darkness. "Ryan!" Jack screamed, rushing after him, but it was too late. Ryan disappeared into the mist, swallowed by the shadows of the trees. His screams echoed in the distance, but they were cut off abruptly, as if the forest had swallowed him whole. "No!" Emily sobbed, tears welling up in her eyes. "We couldn't save him." But there was no time to mourn. The creature's presence was still there, still lurking, still waiting for them. Emily turned to the others. "We need to go. Now!" The stone archway loomed in front of them, dark and foreboding, but it was their only hope. They rushed through it, desperate to escape the forest, but as soon as they passed under the arch, the mist seemed to thicken around them. The ground beneath their feet began to shift, and the air grew colder, heavier. They had entered something else, something worse. The final awakening. As they moved further into the archway, the world around them seemed to warp. The mist that had once surrounded the trees now seemed to stretch out like a thick curtain, swallowing them whole. The stone archway behind them faded into the distance, and soon, they could no longer tell where the forest ended and this new place began. It was as if they had crossed into another realm altogether. The air felt heavier here, suffused with a sense of dread so thick that it pressed against their chests, making it hard to breathe. The ground was soft beneath their feet, like they were walking on a surface that wasn't quite solid. They glanced at each other, exchanging anxious looks, each of them too afraid to speak. "I don't like this," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking as she held tightly onto Emily's arm. "It feels like we're not supposed to be here." Emily nodded, unable to form words. She had the same feeling, a sense of intrusion, as if they had entered a place meant to be untouched, forbidden. Something was watching them, something old and powerful. The whispers had stopped, but the silence that followed was just as oppressive. "We need to find Ryan," Jack said, his voice breaking the silence. "We can't just leave him." Emily didn't know what to say. The thought of going back into the forest, of facing whatever had taken Ryan, terrified her. But she couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at her, the feeling that she had failed him. "Let's just find a way out of here," Emily suggested, her voice barely audible. "We'll find Ryan later, if we can." They walked cautiously through the strange landscape, their steps muffled by the soft ground. It felt like they were moving through a dream, a nightmare that stretched on endlessly. The trees around them were different now, their trunks twisted in unnatural ways, and their branches seemed to reach toward them, as if trying to pull them in. A soft rustling sound came from the shadows, followed by a low growl. Emily froze. It sounded like something was moving, watching them from the darkness. Her heart raced as she scanned the area, but she couldn't see anything, only the dense fog and the twisted shapes of the trees. "We're not alone," Emily whispered. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the smell of decay. Emily gagged, trying to cover her nose. The smell was nauseating, like something had died here long ago. And then, from the shadows, something moved. The creature. It was massive, even more terrifying than before. Its form seemed to flicker and shift in the mist, as if it wasn't fully part of this world. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its claws scraping against the ground as it approached. Its dark, hollow eyes locked onto them, and Emily felt the full weight of its gaze, cold and predatory. "Run!" Jack yelled, but Emily didn't move. The creature's voice, the whispers, returned louder and more forceful than ever. It was calling to her, speaking directly to her mind, its words like poison, twisting her thoughts. She felt her body tremble, her limbs growing weak. "Come to me, Emily." The creature's voice slithered into her mind. "You belong here, with us?" "No," Emily gasped, shaking her head. I won't. But the creature's whispers continued, pressing in from all sides. She felt herself losing control, as if the very air was turning against her, pulling her toward it. Her body was no longer her own. "We need to stop it," Sarah cried. "It's controlling you." Emily felt her breath quicken, panic rising in her chest. She couldn't let it win. She couldn't let herself be swallowed by the darkness. Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Fight it, Emily. Focus. Remember who you are." The creature's whispers grew more insistent, but Emily tried to block them out. She focused on Jack's voice, his hand gripping hers, pulling her back toward reality. It was hard, so hard, but she clung to the thought of her friends, of escaping this nightmare. They couldn't give in. They couldn't let the creature take them. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the creature stopped. Its growls faded, and the air around them seemed to shift. The mist receded, and the forest began to dissolve, like a dream breaking apart. The trees disappeared, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The ground became solid again, and the strange, suffocating atmosphere vanished. They were standing at the edge of the forest now, the sun breaking through the clouds and casting light on the trees. The archway was gone, and the air was clean, free from the heaviness that had weighed them down. We made it out," Sarah whispered in disbelief. Emily blinked, still reeling from the overwhelming experience. The creature, the whispers, the darkness, they were gone. But the memory of it lingered, haunting her. They had escaped, but at what cost? Ryan was still out there, lost to whatever force had claimed him. "We have to go back," Emily said softly, her voice filled with determination. "We can't," Jack replied, his voice raw with emotion. "We can't go back there. It's too dangerous." "I don't care," Emily said, her voice firm. "We can't leave him. Not like this." And as they turned to leave, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the faintest echo of a whisper. "Come to me. Subscribe to my channel Night Howl."